Hello, and welcome back to That Shakespeare Life, the show where we go behind the curtain and into the real life and history of William Shakespeare. This week on Shakespeare's Weird Words, we're going to be diving in and taking a look at Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet and exploring the word cockahoop. If you're new here, hello, I'm Cassidy Cash, and we look inside Shakespeare's history. We've started a new series here on YouTube called Shakespeare's Weird Words, and to help make his plays more accessible for you, we're going to try and explain some of the weird words that you encounter when you're seeing Shakespeare for the first time. And they really are old words. They're from the 15th, 16th, and 17th century, and not a lot of them are words that we still use today. So if they're the first time you're hearing them, you may be like, what in the world is that? Well, that's okay. This is the show where we're going to explain them to you. In Romeo and Juliet, Act 1, Scene 5, Lord Capulet is telling Tybalt that he needs to put up with Romeo and not cause a fuss at the party. And he declares, "You'll make a mutiny among my guests. You'll set cockahoop. You'll be the man." Be the man has taken on its own meaning for the 21st century, and explaining that one is a phrase for another episode. But did you trip over that phrase, cockahoop? I know I did the first time I saw that. What in the world, Lord Capulet? What does that even mean? Is he just an old man using language that's outdated that we don't use anymore? Well, yes, because he said it in 1598 when we think Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet. So to find out exactly what this phrase meant when Shakespeare wrote it, let's take a look at the history. When you look at this phrase in the Oxford English Dictionary, which if you don't already, the Oxford English Dictionary is the go-to dictionary for defining what all the words in the English language mean. And they're also a great place to discover a little bit about the history of the word and its etymology. Etymology is a long word that means the history of words and how they came to mean what they mean today. The modern definition for cockahoop is extremely pleased or triumphant. But OxfordReference.com provides a note that says the phrase comes from a mid-17th century phrase, cockahoop, of unknown origin, apparently denoting the action of turning on the tap and allowing liquor to flow unrestricted. Well, that was interesting because it has to be earlier than the 17th century, right? Because Shakespeare wrote this phrase in the late 16th century. So 100 years before the 17th century. Let's see, well, okay, I guess 1601, 1600 would be the 17th century, and 1598 is pretty close. So, okay, we'll give it to them. They're like 4 years into the 16th century. So, all right, fine. But either way, Shakespeare had to know about it, so it had to come from the 16th century too. And I don't know about you, but that definition doesn't help me any. Why would they call it a cock, and why a hoop? And which of those words is supposed to mean drinking fountain? It's all very confusing. So there had to be more. So I went looking, and here's what I found. According to a fabulous blog I discovered called Word Histories, and I'm not affiliated with them at all, I just came upon them trying to look up the definition of cockahoop, and I'll link you to them below this video so you can go and check out their full history, which includes a lot of old references to this phrase that you'll find very interesting. But the one that I wanted to point out to you today is that we were right in our suspicions about the history of cockahoop. It does go back much further than the 17th century, and actually one of the first definitions that we have, or first uses of cockahoop, comes from 1553, when Thomas More wrote, "Set cockahoop and fill in all the cups at once." So he's still using it in that throw open the tap, let it flow unrestricted. Cockahoop is an adjective whose original phrase was to set the cock on the hoop. So a cock being a rooster and a hoop being the top of a barrel, we still need some more information. So the comedy of Archolastus, which was written in London in 1540, John Palsgrave wrote, quote, "We may make our triumph, keep our," I'm going to say gaudies. It means celebrations, but your pronunciation is as good as mine. "Or let us set the cock on the hoop and make good cheer." He goes on to say, "I have good cause to set the cock on the hoop and make gaudy." So he is again using this phrase in terms of frivolity and just uninhibited, joyous mirth that's going on. And while these references show that the phrase was popular in Shakespeare's lifetime, the first place we find an explanation for why we're connecting roosters and hoops with frivolity comes from English lexicographer Thomas Blunt in Glossographia, which he wrote in London in 1670. And he writes, cock on hoop, defined as, our ancestors called that the cock, which we call a spigot, or perhaps they used such cocks in their vessels, are still retained in water pipes, the cock being taken out and laid on the hoop of the vessel they used to drink up the ale as it ran out without intermission. In Staffordshire, now called stunning a barrel of ale, and then they were cock on hoop, or at the height of mirth and jollity, a saying still retained. Aha, so it all starts to kind of make sense now. Wooden barrels, which were used to hold liquor, were often held together by a metal loop on the top. And since the 15th century, the word cock has been used to refer to any kind of spigot or faucet. How widespread the word was around the United Kingdom is a matter of speculation. Whether this was particularly a word associated with Scotland as opposed to England is worthy of an entire research project on its own. But keep in mind, for Shakespeare, when he wrote Cockahoop in Romeo and Juliet, the UK wasn't the United Kingdom yet. It wouldn't become united until James I comes to the throne in 1603 as both the King of Scotland and the King of England. That's also a history lesson you can find out more about in some of our other videos on our channel, so go check out those. In the 18th century, we find an interesting history of this word pointed out in the book Select Transactions of the Society of Improvers and the Knowledge of Agriculture in Scotland. All of the word "these" in that title are actually there. I'm not stumbling over my words there. But it was written in Scotland, and they defined that let go that water by the means of a spigot and faucet, or cock and pail, as we called it in Scotland. So it could be that Shakespeare was trying to make Lord Capulet seem a little Scottish. I don't know. I'm not saying that definitively. I'm just pointing out that cock and pail was a Scottish phrase, at least in the 18th century. So when Shakespeare has Lord Capulet admonish Tybalt about not tolerating Romeo, he isn't siding with Romeo, which I always thought that when I watched this play for the first time. I thought, wow, Lord Capulet's being compassionate to the Montagues. No. He is not. He's not being compassionate to the Montagues. He's defending his fashionable party, and he doesn't want Tybalt's behavior to set out all manner of chaos into the party. So he's telling Tybalt, don't cause a mess. Don't set the cock-a-hoop, which is what would happen if you have unrestrained alcohol, you have unrestrained behavior. And so he is saying, don't set out all chaos here at my party, just put up with it. So there you have it. That's it for this week. That is the definition of cock-a-hoop here on Shakespeare's Weird Words with me, Cassidy Cash. Thank you for being here and for following along each week. If you like Shakespeare's history and you enjoy learning about some of the weird words in his plays, make sure you hit like and subscribe because we're here every Monday. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.